Good afternoon. We have some new technology today too. Ken bought a camcorder there, and I had it focused perfectly on him. And I don't know if you noticed it or not, I'm a little bit taller. So when we get this, we'll probably notice that my head was cut off when I walked up here. What can the viewfinder?
Looks like it's over his head now.
Now it probably is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll get that worked out. First of all,
I have is the top of your head, so
that's the best part.
Okay. Stop wiggling. You're fine.
Are we good? All right, now I can start wandering around. Welcome everybody, and I think this is it's going to be a kind of an exciting day. But Peter, I know, is nervous, as I heard him tell Ken in the parking lot. The reason he's a journalist and an award-winning journalist is because he doesn't like to get up in front of groups and speak. He likes to make a phone call, get the facts, write the story, turn it in, and take his accolades later. I think he even misses award ceremonies, truthfully. So those of you who do know Peter Gorman, he is an award-winning investigative journalist. His list of credentials and accolades is very long. Peter is also one of those people who could have been many things in this life. Ran restaurants and clubs in New York City and Manhattan. Has traveled extensively all over the world, India, South America. I met Peter 10 years ago when I made a trip to the Andes and to the Amazon to get away from an experience that I had had the previous year in Egypt. So, you know, we all pick our own forms of poison.
That
Mine
sounds
was
like a meeting right there.
to leave Egypt and go to the Amazon. We had an opportunity there to either go to Canada to see a group of people speaking on paranormal events, but I saw a little blurb that said Peter Gorman is making his final trip to the Amazon with his teacher Julio. Because Julio was getting up in age, they didn't expect that Peter would be able to be with him much longer. So I called the person who had already bought a ticket for the trip to Canada and asked, is there any way I can get on this trip with Peter Gorman? They told me yes. I pays my money, I goes to South America, and I met this man. And I have to admit, it changed my life. I met my wife, who was working for him and owned a restaurant in Iquitos, Peru at the time, and I ended up adopting her children and following in Peter's footsteps and making many trips down there, building a family. But Peter also had done the same thing. In 25 or 30 years of traveling down there, he also met a woman and adopted her children and started a family and helped them immigrate to the United States. That's as far as the similarities go. Peter also is one of those unique individuals who is a true healer. And what I have only studied and wished to be, Peter is becoming. And I can tell you right now, a shaman is someone who heals and cares for people on this plane and on a spiritual plane. And I have seen Peter Gorman do miraculous things. But compared to his teacher, he's only just beginning. But I would like to introduce to you the son of Thomas and Madalena Gorman, and my very good friend, Peter.
Can I go home now? That was great. Whoever that guy is, please get up and I am a journalist by trade, but I also have been traveling since I was just a little kid. I used to hitchhike when I was 10 or 12 years old. I ended up logging over 50,000 miles hitchhiking around the United States, and have traveled to a number of countries. Today, Lynn said, would you come down and talk about shamanism? And so what I thought I would talk about is what I think shamanism is from my experience, which might be different than what other people have studied. And then how did I end up getting touched by that? And then what have I seen it do in terms of real world time for people? And then what has it done for me, this 25 years of work? I hope somebody took notes. If you remind me of those 4 items, that would be swell.
Can you do that in the time we have?
So, for me, shamanism is a way of working that begins with a concept that there is a life force, a willful personality in everything that you see and an awful lot of things that you don't see. And a shaman is a person who can access those life forces to communicate, whether it's with that table, with a rock, with that tree, in order to be able to make changes in this level of reality. Okay? When I say everything with life force, the first time I realized what the scope of that was maybe 18 or 20 years ago. I was working in South America, but I was also working with a wonderful medicine woman named Bertha Grove, a Southern Ute outside of Durango. She's passed just last year, so did her brother. But she was really kind of the clan grandmother, and her brother and her son were the roadmen for the peyote ceremonies, for the Native American church ceremonies. And it had taken me maybe a year to get into the first ceremony. They just didn't want a white guy there. They certainly didn't want a white guy who might write an article about it. They didn't want, you know, this is before the Freedom of Restoration of Religious Freedom Act, so they were definitely in a position where they could have trouble if I came and wrote. So after about a year, they trusted me enough to bring me in. And 3 or 4 years later, they trusted me enough to bring a sister of mine. Now, a sister had been a wonderful designer. She, a graphics designer. She designed the MTV logo, among other things, so that's one that you would know. The changing logo was her big spot there. But she had become an acupuncturist. And she was interested in seeing this Bertha Grove that I was raving about. And she was never going to go to see Julio with me down in Peru. And so Bertha finally said, okay, you can bring your sister. I brought my sister. Now the peyote meetings were all-night meetings. You'd get together in the day, you'd buy all sorts of food and make food for the next morning's breakfast, and then you'd essentially fast all day and then sit all night in the teepee with, you know, a fire being tended. It gets very hot, and the peyote buttons would be passed around and around, and the drummers with the water drum would be drumming all night. And if it came to me, my job was just pass it along. You know, you don't know what you're doing, don't think you know how to drum. And about 3/4 of the way through the ceremony, maybe 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, the ceremony was being held for a young fellow who was quite ill. Bertha stood up, she called the young fellow over, and she worked on him for a while. And then she began to suck his disease out of his head. And she worked for a long time, and you know, it's a very earthy thing. And she finally got it out, excused herself, stepped out of the teepee, and returned in maybe 10 minutes. And then the boy sat, she sat, and the ceremony continued till 7 or 8 in the morning, and everybody had thanked all of their cattle by individual names, etc., etc. When we were having breakfast, Bertha called me over. He said, bring your sister. My sister's 4 years older. She said, Pat, I said, Peter, your sister Pat has got a problem. She said, Pat, last night in the ceremony, I saw that you're a healer. But I'm going to tell you something. Everything you're taking out of people is landing on you. She said, do you see what I did last night? I sucked that little boy's illness right out of him. He's going to get better. He's better right now, once his body realizes it. She said, but when we Indians suck out a sickness, we don't swallow it, and we don't spit it out, because that sickness has the same life force as the biggest tree, or the widest river, or the strongest human. And if you swallow it, that sickness is now in you. If you spit it out, that sickness is now on the ground waiting for the next person. And someone else, or some dog or cat, something's going to step on that sickness. It'll take hold of them. It won't be the same sickness, it'll just be a negative energy force. So in that boy, it might be a small brain tumor. The next person, it might be that they just twist and break their ankle. The next person, it's something else. It'll show up in different people different ways. But remember, it's got a life force. And then she said to my sister, so what I do is I put up a lot of phlegm in my mouth that you heard I was doing when I was sucking that boy's sickness out. And I catch that sickness in that phlegm. When I went outside, I wrapped it in kind of an invisible gauze, and I put it in a far, far away planet that's very cold, that as far as I can see for the history of the universe is never going to be inhabited by a life force that could be hurt by that. And she said, each of us healers do it a different way. You pick a place to put it, but you don't just throw it. And whatever you do, you don't put it in yourself. And then she said to my sister, well, the problem is you've got all sorts of illness all over you. Everything you're taking out of other people is on you right now. And if you don't get rid of that soon, you're going to be very sick. And my sister didn't pay attention. And about 3 months later, she began coming down with ailments that to this day, 20 years later, leave her half crippled and nobody can figure out what the heck is wrong. I mean, they can figure out 100 different things that are wrong, but she can't actually have Chinese seeping stomach. And she can't have, you know, diseases particular to African Americans, and she can't have diseases particular to, you know, people who live in Finland. She's got them all because they were all her clients. And she's kind of stuck with them, and she's really crippled, and she sort of regrets kind of having paid more attention to when Bertha said, work with me for a couple of months, let me clean you, you know. So when I say with shamanism, we're talking about a belief system, which those who perform work with shamanism wouldn't say belief system at all. They would just say the reality is, you know, and that there is a spirit and everything. You can access it. If you access it, you can make friends with it. If you can make friends with it, you can ask it to help you, because there's a million ways they can help you. The most obvious are look at the plants. Without even us asking, the plants make our shelter, our medicines, you know, our clothes, our food. You know, so that's the simplest way to look at it. But how do you access these spirits? How do you come to terms with that? Your body doesn't see the ghosts. Well, you guys might see the ghosts, but most people won't recognize that the ghosts are there. Most people won't see the aliens. They won't see the lines above the earth. Most people would deny they're there. And the only thing I can say that the simplest and clearest way that I can explain it is to say, think of a dog whistle. You blow a dog whistle, you don't hear a thing. Your cat doesn't hear a thing. Crickets don't move at all. That dog is either gone so fast that he doesn't want to hear that at all. Well, just because you didn't hear it doesn't mean it wasn't there. It was there. So if you could have broadened the spectrum of your hearing, broaden that band just a tad, you'd hear that dog whistle. If you could move your body the way Flash moved in the old comic books, you know, maybe not fast enough to walk through a door, but move just at a little bit different pace than you are now, there might be all sorts of things that you might see that are here right now with us. For the shaman, this is a regular, integral part of how he works. The shaman, in my experience, most often is someone like Bertha Grove. I mean, just an Indian gal born up, you know, being taught by, I don't know, reservation life, you know, or somebody like my teacher Julio, just a fisherman on a river. You know, these are not people who set out to become curanderos or healers, but they nonetheless ended up becoming in tune with these things. Now, in both those cases, some people can reach a place where they can communicate with the spirit of things by using yoga or meditation, and there's probably a million other ways to do it. One of the ways that's done throughout most of Western United States, and certainly throughout South America, is the use of plant teachers. Ayahuasca, which is what I've been working with primarily for the last 25 years, is the plant teacher for northwestern Amazonia. You think about northern Mexico and the southern United States, you think of peyote. If you think about the mountains in the Andes, whether it's Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, you think about San Pedro cactus. You think about Russia, you think about Amanita muscaria, a mushroom that was so powerful that the shamans, which is where we get the word from my partner, the shamans used to eat the mushrooms and then let the people drink his urine because it was too strong for most people to actually take. And I would say most of the medicines I've taken are too strong for people to take, and there's always those moments of extreme regret when you say, oh, not this again, I'm not strong enough for this. So I just really want to start with that, the idea that the shaman, or the curandero or curandera, because there's as many females as males, is the person who can access the spirit to other things, to everything around us, or to a number of them, to be able to effect changes here. Now, how did a white guy from Queens end up, doing this? In fact, as I said at the beginning, I really love to travel. And by the time I got to the point where I was traveling down to the jungles of Mexico fairly regularly, my wife at the time knew I was going to be headed for the Amazon shortly. So she bought me the scariest book she could find from Strand's, the great bookstore in New York City, called Headhunters of the Amazon, about a fellow who spent 6 years in serious trouble on the Rio Yavari. It's the border between Peru and Brazil. And that, of course, was exactly where I had to go after reading that book. And going there, I was going to go myself, and a couple of friends, good pals of mine, decided they would come and make sure I didn't get killed. And so my concession to them was, okay, I'll climb the mountains at 16,000 feet, even though I smoke 14 packs of cigarettes a day. In return, you come to the jungle with me and let me be unfettered when we get there. Well, the Peru we landed in, it was 1984, it was right in the middle of the Civil War. It was kind of an interesting place to land. Number one, nobody had written about the shamanism there to speak of. A couple of people had, but remember, there was pre-computers, and so you really had to go to the library to find those books, if you knew they were even written. And even the Civil War was not being covered very much up here. The Civil War was mean enough that I remember Chuck and I came in one night, my friend Larry came in the next. We'd been told it was a curfew, and we stayed in one place where we got off the airplane, or as far as they were allowed to drop us for the whole night. In the morning, we said, okay, now we can walk from here to there to go to the hotel. And on the way, we were stopped by about 40 soldiers who chased us 2 blocks. We thinking they were chasing bad guys. Turned out it was us. And then, put us on the floor and strip searched us and threw us in jail for a couple hours. By the time we got out, Larry was being picked up by the police because it was a full day. And it was worse. There was gassings every day. People were being shot every day. I mean, it was a massive, horrible thing. Going where we went was mostly excluded most of that, okay? Up in the Cordillera Blanca, up at Machu Picchu, mostly that was excluded. And then it was my turn, we went to Iquitos. And Iquitos, to me, was the jumping off point for the Yavari River. I didn't think we'd get there the first year, but I wanted my introduction. And, but it was a pretty backwards place. We were met by a smarmy little guy named Moises Viena, who wanted to take us out to the jungle. And I knew much better, and I said, get out of here. So I just told my friends to hop on a riverboat, and let's go somewhere. And then we'll find a guide there. Well, we did, and we ended up in a little town called Requena. And the little town of Requena was a hilarious little mix of indigenous people and locals in the middle of nowhere, about 300 miles, 275 kilometers upriver from Iquitos, where one boat a week stopped by. And no one would take us out to the jungle. It seems a group of Indians from the Yavari River, the Matzes, had come across in 1972, not that much earlier, and had raided the place. And they'd taken some women, and they'd taken some machetes, and so everybody was terrified to go into the jungle. So nobody would take us out into the jungle at all in this jungle town. They'd go as far as the back of their fields, and that was it. By the time we made it back to Iquitos, who do we run into but the smarmy little guys waiting for the boat saying, now, are you ready to go to the jungle? I'll even throw an ayahuasca. And we said, what are you? But my friend said, Pete, it's the only chance we got. There's nobody here in this whole town who claims to be able to go into the jungle. We just tried it our way. It didn't work. So, I mean, it was great to be on the river town, but, we didn't get out there where you want to go. We didn't see lions and tigers and bears. So we went with Moises. And Moises kept making a big deal out of this ayahuasca, and I had never heard of this. And I had no idea it was connected to shamanism. We were just going out in the jungle. We were going to hike around. I want to see some big trees, and I want to see some big snakes, just like Anybody would. You know, you got your imagination of what the Amazon's supposed to be like. Get me to it. Put me in the middle of it. Let's see what happens. And, well, the ayahuasca turned out to be, Moises took us up the river for a few hours. He puts us off, he hikes us here, he hikes us there, and he finally brings us to this tiny little house, just a still platform house with no walls on it. And he says, is Alfonso? And the woman says, no. And he says, well, tell Alfonso when he comes back to make ayahuasca, we're going to come by tonight. And we still had no idea. Eventually, we drank it that night. The simplest little ceremony. We went to his house, 8 o'clock at night, and Alfonso said, everybody shut up for now. Sit down, shut up. His wives and kids were already asleep. I had no idea what we were going to expect. And just when about an hour went by, and he suddenly uncorks this bottle of dark brown liquid and lights a black tobacco cigarette on my pacho and starts to, he begins to chant, you know. All right, this is pretty, but it's real simple. This is nice. And then suddenly he takes a little gourd, he pours it, he hands it to my friend Larry, pours it, hands it to my friend Chuck, and I'm thinking, I don't know this guy. I don't know Moises. I don't know this medicine. I've never been, what the hell are we doing here? And then I thought, well, my friends already did it, so that's going to be really tough to explain to their wives if they end up dead and I end up saying, nah, I decided against it. Exactly. So I went ahead and drank the stuff. And there was, it just made the evening quiet. It seemed like, okay, well, what are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? About 20 minutes after Alphonse drunk, Alphonse suddenly started to make sounds in his stomach. He started to make a rumbling. And the rumbling began to, you know, not like there's somebody throwing up. It sounded like maybe a waterfall in reverse. Water's tumbling up stones. It's up stones, way from down deep into it. It was like the most beautiful and amazing sound I'd ever heard. And by the time it came out, it was a roar. It was a roar. It was a cascade. Although nothing actually came out of his mouth. It was just his insides cleaning. And I thought, that's, I suddenly felt it start to happen to me. And I thought, what is this? All right. There was no resisting this thing. But when it came out, it wasn't like you were vomiting. As I said, it's earthy down there in third world countries. It was as if you were being cleaned from the inside, as if somebody took a great big brush and was scrubbing you from the bottom of your feet up through your insides. And as you started to throw up, it wasn't physical. Moises hadn't let us eat anything that day. It was as if over and over I started to watch little films in fast motion of like horrible things I'd done. Like as a 10-year-old, I remember I just set up this little stereo in the attic where my room was, and my sister Barbara had come up. Of course, that was the day she had to get into what the stereo was set up on. And I just punched her in the arm as hard as I could. And I just watched that about 100 times until I kind of threw it up out of me. And I watched 10 of those movies, 20 of those movies, over and over. I was purging this horrible stuff. And when it was all over, I thought, okay, now I know what ayahuasca is. And as soon as I did. Because I saw a bird, and when I saw the bird, I suddenly realized I'm with the bird. I feel muscles moving. What muscles are these? And they were my feather muscles. And the bird was, we began to look through the bird's eyes. And we began flying over mountains, and we began flying, I don't know, just gigantic distances. It was like, this is amazing. This is like Carlos Castaneda stuff. This is cool stuff. Oh, this is going to be the greatest thing in the world. And then suddenly the bird just tips off the face of the earth, and down we go. We split the water, picked up a fish, snapped it in half, and on the way back up I thought, oh. And just then the fish swallows it, or the bird swallows the fish whole, and I almost choked. And in choking, I was right back on this desk, you know, on the platform hut. And I thought, oh my goodness. And for the rest of that night, it seemed available to me. Whenever I wanted, I could fly with that bird. And the next day, I went to Moises, and immediately, of course, my friends didn't have much effect that night at all. And I said, what the heck is this? And he said, this is the medicine that keeps people alive here in the jungle. I said, well, what do you mean this is the medicine that keeps people alive? They said, this is part and parcel of living here. Whether it's from the purge, to clean your stomach out of parasites and bacteria, and your whole system out of parasites and bacteria, on the one level, or on another level, whether it's your ability to go visit, this is how people visit their family in distant places around here. This is how they go to visit dead people. This is how they go to visit their ancestors. But it's also the medicine that people like Alphonse use to heal people here. And, well, that was the end of our trip with Moises that year, but I had vowed to come back. And of course I came back, and I ended up coming back every year, sometimes 3 or 4 times a year, and for a few years lived there, in fact, because I was so compelled. And I never did get that particular bird again. But I did learn that the disease concept down in Northwest Amazon is that your physical disease, your symptoms, are a result of a disorder on another level of reality. And that the ayahuasquero, curandero, the healer, or in the mountains it would be the San Pedro man, or whatever it would be, but here it would be the ayahuasquero. He would drink the ayahuasca. He would go to this other level of reality, ask spirits that he's familiar with, what's the disturbance with this person? What is wrong with this person? And what do I need to do to fix it? And then he comes back and says, okay, this is the deal. Now there's several types of healing that come out of that, and some are real easy and some are real hard. For me, one of the most direct healings, or, well, explanations for how to heal was when I was having a little bit hard time making enough living to support my family, writing. I was just, and in the midst of an ayahuasca experience, asked, come on guys, what do I do to make a living with this? And one of those spirits says, oh, that's easy. Drink less, write more. So some of that's simple. One man came to Julio one time, and also a simple one, and he said, every time I sell my plantains, I get hurt. Something happens, I hurt my leg, my arms, something happens. Can you please find out who's putting the evil eye on me? And in the same way that we say everything has a life force, your intentions, if you think negatively enough and hard enough about somebody, you're sending out some energy. And he was imagining it wasn't just someone, but it was someone maybe going to a curandero who had fallen off the wagon a little bit, called brujeria, who was specialized in being able to push a lot of force and thought to be able to cause his fellow a problem. He said, somebody's jealous because I sell such good plantains and I make good money, and then, bang, something happens. Julio said, well, yeah, I'll drink. So he drank ayahuasca. About an hour later, 2 hours later, it's not a very long experience, most of the time. Came out, he was just laughing when he came out. He said, nobody's giving you the evil eye. What's happening is, every time you sell your plantains, I saw that you go to a little cantina in Enero Herrera. You get good and cockeyed drunk, you come outside, and you trip on the broken step. So, here's your 2 alternatives. Quit drinking, or fix the step. I mean, it sounds simple, but that's the sort of thing most of these guys are dealing with. Yes, Julio didn't know this fellow from anybody. He didn't know where this guy's plantains were. He didn't, he certainly knew that the bar, because he liked to have a drink down there too, but he didn't know the man from that. But his ability to be able to get up there and see. The medicine, over the years that I got to take it, I realized the medicine is partially visionary and partially just very clear. When the spirits want to hone in and tell you something, like drink less, write more, they can be really focused. There are other times when they make you suffer for your learning, just suffer a lot. There was one case when I split up with the woman who bought me the book that brought me to the Amazon to begin with. We had broken up, and years later, I was seeing someone else, and she was remarried and had a baby, and in the middle of one of these sessions, she just showed up, and I said, oh, I didn't mean to call you, I'm sorry. I said, no, you have to stop, thinking about me, because you're still holding on to me. And I said, I'm really not holding on to you. She said, yes, you are. I said, I'm not. I want you to be anything. She said, stop. See what you just said? You want me to be. It's not your business that you want me anything. The person you knew doesn't even exist anymore. You have to entirely let go. and tired of that company. Because even your wishing me well is holding on to me. And that's holding you back. And it's dragging me into your dream right now. Okay, so on a physical, and that certainly changed my behavior a little bit, and I think we cleared that one up. I later vomited that scene out about 100 times after I'd seen it over and over and over until I was really, okay, I'm through it. Claire, you're free. Okay. Get out of here. And then suddenly, she was. Other healings that happened. I've seen, I'll get to me later, but at some point in the process, to be able to go down there and to afford it. As a journalist for years, I got tremendous support from Omni or Playboy, or I collected herpetological specimens for the University of Rome, and that bought me one great trip, and I collected for the American Museum of Natural History, throwaway artifacts from the Matzes, and that bought me half a dozen trips from big magazines, because everybody wants to go down an exotic place. But I had this hook that I'm collecting for them. And that suddenly gave me an edge up. And so I collected, I wind up being taught how to collect, and then collecting plants from curanderos up and down the Avery River for Shaman Pharmaceutical when they were a big deal in 1991, before Lilly took all their money out of that corporation. And so they all blew me. But finally, with some of that stuff, you can only milk it so long, then I had to come to terms with the fact that if I really want to get up and see Julio, if I want to fly from New York and support the kids, and now it's fly from Texas, but still the same deal, and support the family, then I'm going to have these things pay for themselves. So I had to start bringing guests down. And I'd resisted for a long time, but about 1998, when we moved there, is when it first hit me. I can't support this extended family, larger than you guys, in clothes, shoes, and food every day for the rest of my life on what we can eke out of a little bar down here. So I'll take some guests, and a company that had been after me, I finally said, okay, I'll take some people. Over the years, people just like you or people like Lynn have come down in the middle of personal crises as a rule. And they need something big to happen in their life, and if something big is something like the Amazon. I mean, some people buy themselves a $50,000 car, and some people take a trip somewhere and see, maybe this will change my perspective on things. And Julio, the old healer, was a very, very good curandero. I remember one of my fairly early guests, great, big, rich, young fella from Hawaii. His wife had been a model on the front of magazine covers. He'd been a bodybuilder, big enough, not like a world champion, but big enough to make a lot of big magazine covers. And he had just been on Forbes, I think it was Forbes magazine, as one of these guys traveling around the country and buying up depressed housing and then turning it over when that was still in vogue some years ago. And I guess he was one of the early people noted for doing that. And 6 months after the trip, I know he had a good time on the trip, but I didn't know if anything happened to him or not. And 6 months after the trip, he writes me a letter out of the blue. He says, Peter, I never told you this, but when I got there, my wife had to pressure me to go. All I wanted to do was, for me, every day before the trip, for years, I've been waking up and wondering, is today the day I put the pistol in my mouth and just finish it off? He said, I don't quite understand how. But every day since that trip, I wake up and say, oh God, this is great to be alive today. That's a kind of shamanic healing that, there's no sparklers going on. I had one woman from Australia who called. She was dying of cancer. She'd been given 6 weeks to live, 2 weeks to live, something so extraordinarily tiny was, and I said, you're not coming down with me. Why do you want to come down with me? She goes, I want to die in the jungle. I said, well, that's really not going to look great on my resume. I'm going to drag a dead person back and explain that she ordered it. And I said, no. I know. It turned out I was really broken, so I finally said, all right, you guys. Okay, you come to meet me, but you got to make a promise. I'm going to have to say a quick prayer that you're going to make it through at least the jungle and up to Christmas. So I'm going to give you 6 months right now. And she laughed. I said, I'm going to give you 6 months. The medicine's going to give you a lot more than that. Don't worry about that. But really, it's hopeless. I mean, she's in final stage cancer. They've done everything they can. And she showed up. She was on so many painkillers, she looked okay. But her boyfriend said, no, she's good. We'll be surprised if she makes it this week. She might die on the boat, go ahead, she's just finished. Well, Julio had always said, you know, you can't, cancer is cold and ayahuasca's hot, and you never cure cancer with ayahuasca. You just don't do it. But he said, but let me see what else I might be able to see. So he said, okay, I'll make the ayahuasca for the woman. He made the ayahuasca. He drank the ayahuasca that night. The woman was there a week. She drank it once and then said, I'm never drinking that again. I didn't like the throwing up part. I'm too ladylike. I didn't like having an issue, you know, in front of strangers. And Julio the next day came out of the first session though, and he called to one of his sons and he said, I need you to go get me some medio relaco, I need you to get some chuchuasi, I need you to get, and he gave him a list of plants that he talked to his comrades above about, and his son went out and collected them, he came back and he spent the whole day making this decoction of these plants. Took all the plants, put them out of the diente, let them sit for 2 more nights, and then he gave them to the woman and said, okay, you drink 1 ounce of this every 3 times a day until it's gone. She said, I can't drink alcohol, I'm on all these pills. He said, fine, then die. She said, all right, I'll drink the alcohol just a little bit. Her boyfriend was very good. He was a heavy drinker, so he was able to kind of convince her that she should at least have a little bit. That woman wound up writing me about every year from different places, and she only stopped 2 years ago, so I'm thinking she might be dead now, but this is 2004 to 2009. Hello, I hated the trip. You were a shooting Russian call. I hated the trip. I still think you totally cheated us. It was horrible, and I'm in the Alps skiing. A year later, you know, hi, I'm over in Russia right now, and I'm on the train, and it is gorgeous. No thanks to you. So, again, the kind, you know, these kind of healings, I don't know, when you talk about shamanism, to me, it's really about a methodology, really fairly accessible, to perform these sorts of healings. In my own experience, like, what have I ever gotten out of it with all this work? Because it's been an awful lot of work. I still can't fly, can't get invisible, have no x-ray vision. You know, you don't get any of that stuff. I did get some nice gifts. I got a gift one time. My son, he blows about 17 years old. He's turning 25 this month. He was out in our backyard over here, and he just dislocated his ankle and foot hard. I mean, it was really awful. So his mom called me and said, Peter, can we fix this? I said, fix it, we have to go to the doctor. She said, no, look at him, he's in too much pain. You know how to do this, you've been working with Julio for 20 years, just fix it, for goodness sake. And so I looked at it, and I said, all right guys, give me a hand. Sure enough, they just showed me, push this bone here, that bone there, then push this one, and that one in there, then push the all right. It was just like a blueprint on his foot. It was like looking at his scalp. I just snapped. He was playing in 10 minutes. I mean, there must have been 12 bones in the place. It was horrible. Could I do that again? Not in a million years. It was just in that moment, you know what I mean? The guys who are the curanderos, the shaman who are real shamans, these guys can access those spaces at will. They spent their whole lives, you know. They can't access them selfishly. It's not as though you can walk around and say, I need to find a $20 bill. I mean, if you do that, then you either end up in the Brujeria side or you end up powerless. The spirits are not here just waiting, you know. I don't think the rich part or the greed part or the ego part means a lot to them. In fact, I don't think they like that at all, you know. On the other hand, for me, the deepest healing was after my family broke up, and I was having a very difficult time with it. I mean, I don't know if you guys ever did this, but it's really hard. If you think you're in the best marriage in the history of the world, you find out you're not only not in the best marriage, but it turns out it hasn't been the best marriage for the entire time you've been married. In fact, it's really been horrible for the other person. And you know, you thought it was heaven on earth. So I was having a difficult time with that. And the medicine, over the course of about a year, the medicine made it really clear. You know, you want to make them happy. You know, it was particularly my ex and my baby daughter at the time. And said, you know, do you want to know how to? You have to be them. And I kept saying, I don't know how to be them. You know what I mean? I would try to imagine myself them. Like, what can I do to make them happy? If I make them happy, then of course she'll come back to me, right? So, and it took about a year until I was finally shown, you know, to make them happy, you have to be them means you have to be in their skin. And in their skin, particularly, not my baby, but my ex, didn't see me anymore. I wasn't even there. So to make her happy, I just had to disappear. And that was a hard one. But that was one of those lessons that really, I mean, to me was a shamanic, like, if it was somebody else, it just would have been a normal, go to a psychologist, it'll explain it to you. But for me, I'm a hard-headed Irish kid. It's, you know, come on, I know she must still love me. It's impossible. What's wrong here, you know? And so it really took that sort of forceful insight to realize, you know, and I don't know what else I was going to say. Can you guys hit me up with some questions? Because I'm really good at the question stuff. Yes.
Peter, you mentioned that first night you took ayahuasca that your two friends didn't seem to have much of an experience. Can you talk a little bit about that? Some people just don't seem to have, do they not ever have a relationship with divine? Or it just takes more time for some people, or what?
You're looking at one of the hardest nuts to crack in the world, back there in Mr. Chilson. Am I allowed to talk about you or no?
You may talk about me.
In this context?
Just don't embarrass.
No.
Don't tell
I was
me.
just on an email from a great friend today who has done ayahuasca. He came down on a trip, did it a few times with Julio, had wonderful stuff, but he never had the visionary aspects. He never got to go to other worlds. He never got to see the spaceships. He never got to get on the space. He never got to talk to those guys and gals, those critters. And you know, to me, that's like, oh, let's get rid of that and get to the healing part, you know. And whereas other people are like, no, we have to get that. I think some people are maybe too scientific, tougher to let go. Some people might just have a physical threshold dose different. I don't think it's the chemicals in this. I think the chemical are what opens the door and relaxes you for the spirit to talk. So I think the spirit will talk anyway. But in terms of sometimes, like for instance, just Lynn's a big guy. Lynn, the first time he was with me, he was down there. I think it was the first night we drank. And at the end of the night, I had this very, very, very amazing night. All sorts of crazy stuff had happened. And Julio had given me a couple of guardians that were going to like, take care of me for the rest of my life. The equivalent of Catholic guardian angels, basically, except they don't like bullshit. Because if you lie to them at all, they really make you like, oh. Lynn was like, wow, I didn't get anything. I said, you didn't get anything? Nothing at all. Come on, nothing. Oh, it was brilliant. He said, no, wow. I wouldn't even know if I could call it anything. I mean, there was one point, you know, Julio's paying attention to these girls over here, and I'm thinking I could be in Canada. I spent all this extra money to come down here, change my plans, and this is what I get is just stupid of me. Julio, if you got anything, show me something that'll, you know, give me an idea. I didn't just totally waste my time and money and life on this. And he said, well, at that point, then Julio stood up, became 14 feet tall. His chakras lit up. They all began spinning, sending sparks all over the place, hitting me, and just covering me in these sparks. And then Julio said in plain English, now, do you mind if I get back to the work I was doing on these women over here? And sat back down. And said, that's true. I said, well, what else? What else? 'Cause I know you got something. I mean, I know you're saying you nothing. What? Something. Well, there was just one moment when Julio stood up and he took my heart out and he put it in Karina, your cook's chest, and he took hers out and put it in mine. And then I saw us walking down the aisle. I mean, talk about stupid, you know, I just must be horny or something. Of course, he married Karina 4 months later or something, you know what I mean? So I think sometimes people who say they don't get anything, it's something so fast, so flash, You know, I mean, your spirit might have gotten it, you know, your soul, your beingness, your isness got it. But your brain wasn't able to take enough time to put it, you know, I mean, whatever the visions are themselves, however you see the spirits, however, you know, all that is just how your body makes sense of something that it's not used to seeing at this frontal lobe level. You're not used to, you know, so you have to put it together. You have to give it a voice, you give it a shape, or you give it a color and a sound. So I think sometimes people have difficulty with that if they too much one side brain or the other, which is why I think sometimes people don't seem to get it. I know Phoenix, my friend who wrote today, he just wanted to say it's now been 8 years since I've seen him, and he just wrote a nice note, Peter, you know, the trip changed my life. You know, but he's done ayahuasca 100 times since then. He's lived down there, not lived down there, but he spent months and months down in Peru. And he still is waiting for his first visionary effect.
All right, now, what's your story? He's telling your story. What's your story of your story?
It's very similar. It truly is.
You were going to say you didn't feel anything.
No, well, in hindsight, everything he said is true. So in hindsight, as we were sitting there visiting, I didn't really feel that on that first trip, that first experience, that anything had happened. Now I can vouch for the fact that I would say, well, yeah, I had this fantasy thing that my heart was pulled out and put into Karina's chest. It didn't seem like the vision that I was expecting. You know, you have something built up in your mind and your experience of what you think it's going to be a vision. Yeah. Afterward, and I don't know, I have had the opportunity to drink ayahuasca, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 times over the last decade, and I can tell you that I've had experiences other times where you feel actually like you're seeing something. You know, it's like watching a movie. But I think what most people are afraid of when they talk about ayahuasca, they think it's a drug. You know, we all grew up in the 70s, and we were all so enculturated about drugs, bad drugs, you know. And I think Peter will vouch for the fact, and I'd like for him to talk a little bit about it. It's not a drug. It is a medicine. It comes from a plant. It is a way of life for these folks. And, you know, I know that some people are so afraid. They think, oh, well, I'll get addicted to this. Trust me, this will never be a party drug. You know, when he talks about violently purging, that doesn't even do justice to what it does or feels like. But the visions, they can be so subtle. I'm sure all of you, when you first fall asleep at night, you see the little faces or the something. Well, it's that subtle, or it can be like a movie. And I've had both. Some people, though, I think find, and I know for a fact, I'll do a segue here for Peter, you get to a point where you don't need the medicine. I have seen Peter sit and someone come in and say they had a problem, and he gets this funny look on his face, and he gets this farther and farther away look in his eye, and before long his facial features change, and he's somewhere or someone else. And he's at that plane, and he's there, and I've seen him come back and do things for people. His mother-in-law, former mother-in-law, was dying of cancer. He used to go off to that place, come back, and rub his hands. I'll tell his story for him now. Rub his hands on her back, and his hands were burned. I mean, they looked like they had third-degree burns. He talked earlier about taking the pain and putting it away because it has life. And the segue here, Peter, is tell them about the Red Room and the fact that, you know, this really is about curing and not being addicted to some drug that you couldn't be addicted to begin with.
Yeah,
so.
Certainly this is not... Pfizer didn't make it, so it's not a drug.
Oh.
Anything, you know, people use drugs to dull the pain, to avoid responsibility, or to get themselves moving. I mean, you know, or to make love. I mean, there's really just 3 or 4 categories that we use what we call drugs for, whether they're aspirin or heroin. Any substance which on ingestion is going to make you vomit, possibly defecate is out in terms of like a love-making drug. Because you're going to be rolling around in a ball, having to relive some of the worst stuff of your whole life over and over. It's probably not going to like help you avoid the pain. You know, in terms of getting you going, you won't be able to move for a couple of hours, so that's not going to work. So it really is excluded. It's not a drug. It's never. It's not at all. But as a when he, yes, I wasn't going to get into this, but yes, there was a point where I needed, because I accidentally was being allowed to take some pain away, then I needed to have a place to put it. And so during one really impossible series of sessions down in Peru, I was fluked at one point as if someone just picked me up and threw me. And I went through this, what looked to me, the way my brain perceived it, was like the top of a cave and thrown into the bottom of it. And I landed like flump, flump, flump. And it instantly was like the most awful, foul smelling. It was, everything was red, because at that period I was dealing with what we call red magic, the magic of what goes in your bloodstream stuff, and which is probably where the healing came from. But everything was red, but it was the most foul smelling stuff. You couldn't hardly breathe in that room. And then I realized some of these men who had been working on my heart with the checklist, with my ex-wife's stuff, they were down there and they were taking, and something, I mean, this is ayahuasca knowledge. How do you know you don't know? I don't know, it's just the way my brain put it together. They had just, what they had done was show me, this is where the bad stuff goes. And these guys can take this negative stuff and turn it into positive stuff and let it get back up. So Bertha was right, but she wasn't completely right. It doesn't have to be on some far-off planet. It can be transformed into positive energy, you know, because energy is energy. But then that was also became the place where I would take my mother-in-law's pain. And that was just an extraordinary time. And I was you know, just asking the fellas and gals, come on, give me some help. She's in way too much pain. She can't live with this. I mean, she's dying anyway, but I mean, she shouldn't have to suffer like this. And we don't want her on the heavy-duty drugs, because she needs to be able to sleep. And I was still insisting that she get up in the morning and make herself some chicken and stuff, you know, like, come on, do that. And she did. But every night for a long time, for a couple of months, we had to do that hand stuff. And I don't know even how it started. She just told me one night, she said, put your hands in my back, take my pain. This is a woman who hated me most of her life and paid brujos to ruin me most of the time. I mean, she was really 2 generations out of climbing trees for coconuts, you know. She was a great indigenous woman, but that's really, you know, she was very suspicious of this white guy coming along to steal, not her daughter, because Peruvian women in that part of the world don't raise their kids. They raise their grandkids, because they have their kids at 15, 16, they're not ready to raise them. So it skips a generation. So here I was taking her, my wife's first 2 kids. She had raised them. It was like, who are you to take these Italo and Marco out of my life? And I understood it, so she sort of hated me. We came to terms with it while she was sick and living at my house. But yeah, that every night that would come through and my hands would just burn and my kids would laugh and they would say, Dad, how much tonight? And we'd go there, we'd do a little ceremony and open the door to the red room and get rid of that stuff. And, you know, by the next day it was kind of scabbed up. By the next night it was back, all open and gooky again. Go ahead, please, another question. Yes?
These people in the village were doing this all the time. What was life like for them compared to our life? How did their lifestyle?
On the river, even now, basically you've got a big river, the trunk of a river, and you've got little tributaries. And so for people who live, the further in you live, the less you need, you better need less goods. Because, you know, if it's a 3 or 4 hour canoe ride out to buy batteries for a flashlight, well, you may not want to go get them by themselves. You're going to wait till you have enough plantains to sell to get salt, and so you can salt your fish, or you can salt meat. You can buy a couple of shotgun shells and borrow somebody's shotgun. So life, even now, is pretty simple. Somebody on the river is going to, every river I've ever been on in Peru or parts of Ecuador, somebody's going to have more money than the next guy, and he's going to have a radio. Maybe once a week he can afford batteries to, you know, blast that radio. Half the river can hear it for an hour or two. But certainly there's no electricity on the tributaries yet. Fujimori, when he was president, did provide one boat with a 40 horsepower motor for every village in all of Peru. And he gave them 40 gallons of gasoline per month, which means one guy or one family, whoever's controlling that boat, can run up and down that river whenever they want until the gas runs out, and then it's somebody else's turn to hold that boat for a month. So life remains pretty simple, pretty austere.
But I mean, from a consciousness standpoint.
Yes. They're not thinking like a Westerner in terms of what I'm getting out of this or it's simply, you know, but it's part and parcel of their life. To them, it's a very ordinary thing to be able to communicate with trees or cats or animals. You're hungry, you need to, you know, go to Julio or go to whoever it is that you're working with. Usually one corredera on the river, might be two, you know, but more than that, there's not enough. Those guys aren't supported by it anyway. But you start to get into egos of how come you brought your son who was vomiting so much to him instead of to me, you know, so it's better if there's just one on the river. But those people fully believe in it's very ordinary for them to be able to go to the Cordillera and say, I have a message from my aunt, you know, the one in Tarapoto, 200 miles east. Can you deliver it and then tell me when she's coming? And so it's expected that, yeah, of course we can do that. You know, boom, boom. And, yeah, by the way, your aunt's going to be here in 4 days. You know, but in terms of, do they think of themselves as, are they conscious of the way our self-consciousness is? No. As a rule, no. They're not. They're really thinking very much day to day. You just get up in the morning and go out and fish. And then when you finish eating your fish, you just rest until you get hungry again, then you go out and fish again. And that's, if you got to make the new leaf section for the roof, you do that. I mean, it's not much more complicated than that. Yes?
Aren't there groups in the U.S. and other places too that are kind of forming little groups or whatever and using this? And
yes,
if
there are.
so, how is it affecting their life and their influence around with themselves and their neighbors, or what good is coming from it?
Well, there's two groups that are pretty recognized, União de Vegetal and the Santo Daime. They're both syncretic, whatever that means, churches, developed in Brazil, one in 1929 and one in maybe 1975. Seagram's there, what's his name? Remember his name? Seagram's there in New Mexico was the head of one of those groups here, and had a big case up in front of the courts because he had 50 gallons of ayahuasca taken. Yes, there are groups. There are small groups here. And curanderos are being brought up from South America all the time to run ceremonies up here. In a lot of ways, like, I had never heard of it, and I was still very well read, and, you know, when I first did it, and there's always going to be a problem because somebody like me is going to write about it, and then other people are going to hear about it, and then somebody else is going to invent the internet, and then it's all over the place. And it wasn't just me. It was me, but there was Terence McKenna, and there was a number of other people who were, you know, who started to write about this in a way that helped make it popular. A lot of people at this stage, I would think, I try to make it real clear to my guests that when we're coming down to Peru, you know, this is not going to just fix your life. You know, hopefully, the entire experience is going to open you up to the fact that your life might need some fixing in ways you don't know. And then hopefully, I'll slow you down enough that you can actually listen to a spirit to tell you how the hell to fix it. It's up to you to do the work. Now, when you say, how does it affect the communities? I don't think it affects the communities much if 6 people are going to get together and instead of get drunk on Friday night, they're going to fast Friday and then drink the medicine Friday night. I think it's, in terms of a bigger effect, and I do think there'll be a positive effect, whether there's a curandero there or not. I think the spirit of the medicine of ayahuasca itself is a very powerful and, for the most part, pretty benevolent spirit. You know, she will heal things. She will help you eliminate things. None of us remember the first time our mother stopped breastfeeding, but it probably left a scar. That one time, one day, we are the best kids in the world. The next day, we're told, you have teeth, get out. Never again. Well, I mean, the kid doesn't know how to compete that way. Or the first time Dad stepped on you when you were proud, like, I'm crawling. Hey, big guy, whoever you are, the guy who loves me, get this baby to help. You know, that's the stuff you've got to throw out. So is it going to help the community? Yes, it is. If those people are going to be affected, be able to get a little lighter in their souls and spirits, and be able to recognize the life in different things. And so maybe they'll hold back on, you know, stepping on that beetle. Maybe they'll hold back on, you know, cutting those leaves or the tree branches, which might be pruning, but maybe you'll stop for a second and say, I recognize my hair a little. Watch. Sorry. I don't know if that will help or not. I think it helps. I think it helps all of us, for everyone who's little. I think it'll help the people. I also think, though, that with the popularity of ayahuasca in the last 4 or 5 years, particularly since Alan Shoemaker started the Shamanic Conference down in Peru over here, there will eventually be a backlash because too many people are expecting too much, too quickly. I can take a trip and I come back, now my wife loves me, my kid's broken leg is better, and I have a job and there's no recession in my life anymore. Stop. Ain't gonna happen that way, you know. Yeah, you might figure out that you're looking for the wrong job. So if you look in a different direction, you might actually get a job, but you're still going to have to find that direction. You know, I think it's like a year's worth of therapy, you know, in 2 days preparation and a one-night event. If you think of it that way, I think it might be better. If you think of it as a cure-all or, you know, fix my life, I don't know. Maybe you guys have all lives fixed. Mine is so far from fixed. I mean, I'm raising my ex-wife's new babies. That's how far fixed I am. But I couldn't have done it without ayahuasca. I couldn't have done it without Julio. Not just ayahuasca. I couldn't willingly be helping to raise my ex-wife's 2 new babies and loving them. And then one day, when their father moves from Indiana to here, or she moves with them to Indiana, they'll be out of my life. And that's going to be okay too. It'll break my heart, but it'll still be okay. Right now, those kids need somebody who loves them unequivocally. They don't call me daddy, they call me Mr. P. Garman. You know, so they know I'm not daddy, but they also know I'm the one who's there when they need something. I'm the one who doesn't yell at them when they break something. Or I'm one of the, hopefully, their mom doesn't either, but I'm just saying, all of that's a benefit to everybody. You know, if I can do that, then that's going to reflect in those kids. It's going to reflect, you know, in my other daughter and my sons. That my sons are raising their first baby. You know, one of my sons raising first baby. So he's taking the key from that. So yes, it's a big help all around, but it's certainly not going to be a cure-all for everything.
I'm having trouble semantically. Let's say I've got a hitch in my get along.
Right.
And I know I find out I can go down to Granbury and there's this woman. And she gets you in there and she talks about the matrix. And all these things are out there and you go through the process of bringing it in through your feet, up through your body, the energy, and without really touching you. She pretty much do the same thing. How do you equate that to no medicines? No, I wasn't.
Yeah.
None of that. Why do I have to go to South America? Can you see the difference in the thing I'm saying?
Yes, but I think fixing a hitch and you get along, like a Reiki maneuver or somebody.
Reiki is
yeah, you know. But I don't think it will be. I think there'd be a limit to what the Reiki could do, and there'd be less of a limit if you were with somebody who could access tons of spirits to see what else you might do to avoid ever getting that hitch to get along again. Somebody, you know, the coordinator might say, drink this, I'll make this preparation. You could go home, go to this tree in your front yard, pull up 12 leaves, steep those, and then this will never come back. I mean, you know, so I think I wouldn't put down the Reiki, and I don't think you need to go to South America, and I don't think anybody needs to drink ayahuasca. If you're willing to meditate for 37 years, you might get there. If you're willing to be a yoga, for 20 years, you might get there.
Well, the
But
chakras involved with all that too.
some, but again, most of the ayahuasqueros wouldn't refer to them that way.
No.
They would, they would now. Some of these, enough gringos going down. There's always one gringo with some money, and he says, this healer is so good, I'm going to open a center. And then they open some centers where people come, and pay exorbitant amounts rather than giving me the money, exorbitant amounts. But, and they go and so that coordinator, when he hears enough from people what the gringos want, he's going to start answering in gringo language. And if you want to talk chakras, he's going to, whatever you want, buddy, it's your money. Whereas in real life, when that guy worked on a river before somebody brought him out and said, work here at this place and live a much more lavish life, and who would say no to that? He wouldn't think in terms of chakras. He might know them, But Julio was always, close the Corona. When we drink ayahuasca, you open the Corona. We need to close that in the morning, and then we need to, watch this over here. This is open. We need to close this. So he might know where they are, but he's not calling them that.
Well, your refusal to believe in or to participate at first, or you weren't buying into the engineering syndrome, or whatever you call it, that would not be too different from people in medicine try to foot that stuff, and they can't get it. They can't get it anymore. But the main thing is, let's say that I'm just old Joe Blow, and I've got to imagine this magic stuff coming up through my body, out of into my extremities, and then back to where it's bad. They're not capable of going there, even imagining that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if they don't know anything you do for anybody like that. They have no way that they can say, fellow, you're crazy as hell. They can't see, imagining the stuff that's eating out of them.
Well, you're right. But now imagine that guy had a headache, and you were able to give him 3 aspirin. Whether he believes in the aspirin or not, the aspirin's going to fix it.
That's when they get ready, you're right.
So, or probably at least eliminate the headache. Yes.
It seems, I'm just trying to sort this out. I think you know the answer to this, but it seems to me you're saying that people that are thinkers may have a different, more difficulty than the feelers. Some people, don't really feel things. Whereas others like try to analyze everything.
Well, I would say more it goes into the analytical. For the people who refuse to turn off their, for instance, on my trips to Peru, I try to shake it up so much you don't know your name. Before we drink ayahuasca, if you still know your name, if I have not, moved you around, and I don't do anything, I just take you, let's go to the cemetery today, let's eat a great meal there. Let's go on a boat on the river for a couple of hours. Just doing simple things. But we will make you forget who you are. And if I can't do that, then you'll stop the analysis. But somebody like Lynn, he's not a scientist. He's, boom, boom, boom. He's thinking all the time, okay, this, then that, this, well, these are how do you shut that off? So even though he still did see stuff and recognized that he did, he had to be pried out of him. And I think we're just over time here.
No, you're not. But there's one thing that Ken wants to make sure we touch on. We've got until 4 o'clock, and he can answer more questions. But Ken wants to make sure that you tell these folks a little bit about the pyramids. And the hope that at some point that we can take an expedition up there, and what makes the pyramids special, and you might even mention Hector along the way, and let's spend a little bit of time with that.
We're talking about it's awful late to talk about it. It's been 30 years worth of work. What he's talking about is some years ago, many of you might know this.
Starts with the CIA.
Well, actually, the CIA planes were flying over some of the Andes, and they were just taking pictures, And a fellow I didn't happen to know who worked for a fellow named Ryan Richards took pictures, and they ended up in von Donigen's book, one of von Donigen's books, about I think it's 5 or 6 pyramidal shapes in 2 lines, seen from the air in the middle of the Peruvian jungle, not visible from the ground, only from the air. But they're all identical in size and shape, and they're all the same size, at least it looks like they're all going to be the same size as the Pyramid of Khufu. Well, why are there two rows of pyramidal shapes in the middle of a jungle? Were they man-made, or are they, you know, some freak of nature? Now, I forget his name, a fellow who heads the New England chapter of the Explorers Club, spent about a day at them. Now, Ryan Richards, who took the photos, who still lives in the Quintos, and knows the GPS, said, no, it wasn't the right guy. He thinks he got to them, but he didn't get to them. In any event, this fellow wasn't impressed, but he was impressed with something nearby. So he spent a couple of hours at the pyramids. They're completely covered with vegetation, you know. And I've been interested in them for a long time because I had dreamt them long before I'd ever seen them. So it was one of those like, they're real? Wait a minute, stop. You know, I'm supposed to go there, and now you tell me they're there? So that was one of those odd, coincidental things. I don't know. But I've got some good backing from museum people. The museums say, like, one, if they're man-made, of course, it would be the discovery of the last, and it would be bigger than Machu Picchu, which is man-made pyramids in the middle of the Amazon jungle where there's no stone to speak of. If they're some freak of nature, then they're definitely an anomaly of major importance, because if there were somehow a river rushing this way that would have cut them at one point, then somehow rivers rushed a different direction, which would be unusual, and ended up with shapes that are, you know, took down a bunch of these little mountains into these pyramidal shapes. That would mean those mountains have to be sandstone or they have to be limestone to be either way. It would be more limestone, which is what much of the Andes are about. Either way, it would have also carved caves in there. It would have carved all sorts of things. And if you've got caves, then you've got animals going in. If you've got animals going in, you've got man following the animals. So, you know, it would almost be more exciting to stumble on them. You know, and so it's been a dream of mine for a long time. And Lynn actually helped put together the Gorman Foundation some years ago, a little non-profit, to be able to get people to send it, because it's not one of those cheap ones. My dream was that it'd be silly to go. I could just go. So what would that prove? Okay. So I saw it, and it was like, I got the right GPS coordinate? No. I need 20, you know, locals in there who can cut away the vegetation so we can find those damn things. I need good botanists in there. I mean, I know something about botany, and I've collected plants, but I need a good botanist, because maybe the most important thing at the entire site would turn out to be what's growing on the damn pyramids. And here we are cutting it away and saying this is garbage. Or maybe, you know, you need a good, in other words, I would like to bring a team. If I have a drugs, if somebody said here's 100 grand, you could do it. I would put together a team that would include a zoologist, a naturalist, an archaeologist, you know, and actually, it wouldn't be that big a deal, and enough people to actually do some measuring. You know, what we see from the photographs, it's an area that's almost always cloud covered. It's very difficult to get, you know, decent photos of that whole area. So when somebody says these are Khufu size, well, the answer is right. So, you know, you climb the thing, or we just use this, you know, we'll figure out how tall that one is, and then we'll figure out how long it is, what the size, and we'll go to the next one. We'll spend a month out there doing this. You know, if we have a team of 10 good helpers, of course you get 10 good helpers, now you need 2 good cooks. You get, you know, unless you're gonna bring your own food, and now you need a good hunter. You know, so in other words, so everything in Peru, everything you do, or anywhere in the third world, once it's more than you, it starts to become, you know, a geometrically larger process. But it would be silly. Lynn and I had a chance some years ago, we had a couple of chances, where we could have just gone and used one local and Ryan's, you know, information. And then we would have got there and nothing. We would have been like the guy from the Explorers Club, even if he was there, so what? You saw these things that are covered with plants and you walked away. I mean, you know, getting there and breaching them is entirely different, you know. But certainly that, yeah. I mean, I think that all of Peru, for me, the way ayahuasca or the shamanism angle, was always part of just the general being on the river. It was part and parcel of the life. It was never brought to a camp where we do ayahuasca, we sit, we drink this for a week, and then go home and change people. It was, no, I'm going to walk to the Yaori with Moises. I could use a little extra night vision. Drink the ayahuasca, get night vision for 4 days, fantastic. You know, wonderful night vision. And clean out your inside so you're not, anything you need to clean out. Oh, incidentally, there's going to be these visionary aspects. But for me, half the time it was a practical use. I need to walk this far. With the Matsez Indians have two wonderful medicines. I mean, tons of shamanism. But those guys are now living so much still, and they worked 25 years ago even more, in a much more traditional way, that they absolutely depend on shamanism just to survive. They've got to be able to talk to animals to find out where other animals are going to be on a given day. I mean, my friend Paolo had 4 wives, 20 kids. Every one of them needs a kilo or 2 of meat every day. That means he's got to get 4 wild boars every day, or his family starves. And not only that, if his family goes hungry, the women will make poison soup. They will kill him, and they will just leave. Because even though it looks like a male-bound, they think it's not. 4 women run 1 man, not vice versa. So of course, he's got to be able to, and so for him it would always be, and he'd go outside, he'd look around, and Bert just told him, over there. And he'd go off, and 2 hours later, we're coming back with tons of stuff. I mean, yeah, that's where they were today. She had her hand up in the back for a minute, and I don't know who she is, so I apologize for calling you she.
Yes, I did have a question or two. If this expedition ever took place, wouldn't you want to take a shaman?
We have there's a fellow named Hector from the mountains who's set for the job. He doesn't know it, but he's the right guy for the job.
He was picked a long time ago.
And also, do you have any concept of how distant or an expedition it would be? How long of a trip from like the most populated city nearby?
Like Puerto Maldonado, it'd be a step above that. It'd be physically, it's 3 days, 3.5 days. So that's 7 days.
Is that walking or?
Yeah, that's when you have to hike. Starting with the hike.
Oh, okay.
And that's the hike distance is about 3.5 days. And getting down there, I mean, outfitting. And I've done other expeditions. I put boats together and stuff where I had to go out on the Yamari for 30 days. Putting the boat together takes a month for a month trip. First you got to find a boat, and you got to, et cetera, et cetera. So this would be the same sort of thing. If you were going to, even on a short version, a reconnaissance mission, where you're going to do maybe 15 days and just do one pyramid, pick one and see if there's anything to it, see what's around there, see if there's any petroglyphs on the stone underneath, see what you come up with, see if it's interesting enough. That would probably still take 10 days to organize to the point where you had the right permissions, and I've got permission for the permissions, but you still have to then get them in writing, and then get the Indians from down in the valley to come. And again, we've got those, but you still have to, if he's out hunting and he's out there, it takes 3 days to organize them, and then you've got to make sure they understand their wives and kids have enough food left up, in the village. And so, every step becomes, it's not just a question of like having a horse and ride to the sunset and you got there.
So, well, and real quick, again, we ran through this exercise. We've done it actually several times, trying to figure out how to put this expedition together and to do it. One of the things that Peter has already gotten also is support from universities and museums to send folks down there on this expedition when it's finally funded. Funding is the key here. We want to take ground penetrating radar. That's a real quick way to find out what's there without having to dig it up. Again, this is not one of those places where, once we've got permission and all those things, it's not one of those places where once somebody breaks a leg that we call the cavalry and say, come get us. This really is third world, out in the jungle kinds of experience. I guess if you were a soldier and you were, a LERP or something, and you were used to being out, you've lived like this. If not, most of us haven't. I know that just the logistics, taking the kerosene and if we've got to take those little generators in and the food, and like you said, once you start taking people in, you got to feed them. Then I know it hasn't. The Matsez Indians say they've not eaten a white man since 1972. I've also heard stories that the Indians that protect this area haven't shot a white man since 2004. So it's that kind of thing that, and Peter's been trying to set the stage for this for quite a while, and I've invited myself along. But I'm going to tell the story. He won't do it. We found this incredible young man, who's probably getting to be an old man by now, but who is a curandero that I met, and Peter has known, he uses the San Pedro cactus, and he practices up in the Andes, in the high Andes. And I guess most of you know the Andes are the second highest mountain range in the world, second only to the Himalayas. And Hector was the first person I physically, with my scientific mind, watched reach into a fire, pull out a burning coal and light a cigarette, and put it back. I watched him stand in sub-freezing temperature in his little cute hat that they wear up in the Andes and a loincloth and nothing else. And I had on my bomber jacket and my long johns and he's just doing ceremony. And Peter, introduced us to him. Hector was one of those guys, no matter how powerful I thought Peter's teacher Julio was, and he was the most powerful man I've ever met. The little bitty guy that used to look at me and laugh. But Hector's tall and thin, and when I met him and watched him with the fire and all those things, I told Peter, I said, this is the guy. When we get to the pyramids and we find out that really is hangars for the UFOs, because even though I'm a scientist, I have a wild imagination. Hector's the guy that's going to know how to open the side of the mountain. And Peter played scientist for a change and went, yeah, sure. And a little bit later he went, yeah, sure. So that's the pyramid adventure or expedition that we've been working on for quite some time.
It sounds like you need to get
we need funding.
Groups from like TV, Science Channel, something like that, with National Geographic, or get them all together.
And, right.
I got lucky one time, a couple of times.
You say you know.
And film it every bit of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we need. And we got to get people past the fact that, like you said, this fellow from the Explorers Club says, well, I was there and I planted the flag. We got to get people past that and say, no, that's not what we're going to do here. We're really going for scientific reasons and for but we want to do the whole gamut from science to metaphysics is what this thing's planning to be. Peter, I'm sorry, I'm taking over your thing, but I know that was really important. Ken and Pat, part of this new group, the E.P.I.C group, is to support expeditions and to help introduce folks to people who will. Ken, I know, was
certainly
very
epic expedition.
But he was very interested in making sure that we got to talk a little bit about that. Ken, was there anything else you wanted to visit about that? Pat?
I have a question now. You said that you've seen this remote viewing device, and also the CIA had taken pictures.
Yes.
Now, what is significant about these pyramids as opposed to other pyramids throughout Central and South America that are buried in the jungle? I mean, there are people who said
they're buried in the mountains in the jungle, not on the forest floor. Okay. That's a big difference. And most of them, in terms of pyramidal shapes, are actually in the Atacama Desert, on the coast of Peru, the coastal areas where the pyramids are being discovered. So if you discovered that someone had made it over the mountains and had brought that technique with them, that would be a tremendous thing. I think it's more important would be if these are, just an analogy, and they really are limestone that somehow, or that was cut in two directions, by the rivers, and then was finished off by man, I don't know. You'd have to. The CIA took pictures because Ryan's a nut. Ryan's a wonderful guy. He's been my friend for 25 years. But he was put out to pasture. I mean, I don't know. Could you prove his descent? No, you can't. I don't know. But know that I know. And but he was put out to pasture, and he said they gave him pick a spot. And he picked Iquitos because he loved Peru, and he worked some of his work in Peru, and so he always loved that. And This was a story someone had given him, and he was chasing this one down when he got those photos. And it wasn't until he was in my bar, the Cold Beer Blues bar in Iquitos, and he didn't drink much, but he was maybe having a soda and a hamburger or something. And he said, "I'll give you this book and that." But he always liked to read when he was there. And one night he picked up the Van Dyke and he opens up, he almost fell off his bar stool. "That's my photo!" And we tracked it down, and sure enough, I mean, that was his photo. And so he didn't know that Van Dyke had used it, and, you know. So that's when I discovered that he had actually taken the picture. Having seen it, I'm not a remote viewer. Ayahuasca has allowed me periodically. Or, as Lynn says, once in a while, after a while, sometimes there's so much medicine in your blood that you don't, that sometimes those changes come on you anyway. Let's just put it that way. So, I've done a lot of time, unless I'm completely full of baloney. I really believe I spent a bunch of time at those things, at least, you know, surveying around, seeing what's there, and seeing where the work would need to be done and stuff. And I think I'll prove right. Somebody had a hand up? All right, well, thanks for listening. If anybody wants to, you can buy my book. Yes.
From an ideal standpoint,
Right.
if you were to ascertain going to Purdue and take the ayahuasca, right, would it be a 3-day trip, a 4-day trip? Would you take it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times? Obviously, you want to come with no preconceived notions because you limit your experience, but how many days and how many times would you try it from an ideal standpoint?
I think the most ideal way to do it, personally, is the way I run my trips, where it's, you know, we generally do it twice, along with the Matzes medicine, Sapo and Nunu, and sometimes we open up on the overnight riverboat ride with a little local magic mushrooms just to get the spirit of the jungle in your system. But it's part of what we do. In other words, ideally, you could certainly go down and find somebody who, you know, you show up in Iquitos on Tuesday, you drink Tuesday night, and you fly on Wednesday. To me, I think you'd lose a lot of the experience. You know, to go to some place and say, well, this is a camp, and it's all air conditioned, or not air conditioned, but screened in, and, you know, cooks are preparing our food, and, you know, we've got nice warm water showers. Again, I don't think that's part of, this medicine grows out of this part of the world, it grows out of this jungle. This jungle is earthy, this jungle is hot, it's sticky. This jungle puts mosquitoes in there to keep white folks out. This is a nasty, dirty, wonderful, glorious place. But there's as much dying as there is living at any given time, you know? So it's very, and to do anything that would avoid that to me, other than a mosquito net at night, and I don't use one, so I'm always in trouble. But other people need them, I recognize that, and so I certainly provide all that. But I think, and I did, the thing is, a couple of years ago, there used to be a couple of other people who did trips like mine, and they have all opened up camps because they can get a lot more people in and out, and in and out, and in and out, rather than find people who are willing to do, you know, my short trip is 8.5 days. That gives you a day and a half in the Iquitos, 6 days in the jungle, and a day to come out and decompress. And almost every time, those people stay an extra day or two, and I hang around with my team just to make sure you decompress properly before you're out of town. So I would say for most people, I think just doing the medicine 2 or 3 times in a 2-week, you know, in a, say 7-8 day period, 3 times would be a lot to me. I mean, there's so much to, you would have 15 years worth of work just figuring out what happened.
Follow-up question. When you have a group you say you bring, is that like 5 or 6 people, and do you find the consciousness of the people dictates, for example, everybody has an energy level and it all has to equal out. So if you go with a bunch of non-believers, you're going to get a lesser experience than if you went with a bunch of people that were more envisioned.
In theory, yes, but these people are vetted very well by me on the telephone. I probably turned down at least half the people that asked to come on the trips, which cost me money, but I just say, like, you're the wrong person. You don't want to swim in the river? No, we will not have a shower. If you bring a shower, I have to cut it up. No. No showers on the river. You swim in the river, yes, piranhas will be there, yes. That's it. So the person who says, that sounds like scary to me, it's like, of course it's scary. That's what everybody else in the river does. The day somebody else on the river shows up with a plastic shower, that solar shower, I'll buy solar showers. Until then, we're living like people on the river live. That's, you know, and everybody, it's gorgeous to go in the water. But so I vet them very well. I still end up with a lemon once in a while when I don't vet enough, or I think
that's how
I really
got
need
it.
a couple of bucks. You know, whenever I get selfish, that's when I pay the price. When I decide I need the money over, you know. But I mean, you do need the money. You know, you can't. It costs $2,000 just to get down there for me on the airfare, and I got to pay a mortgage up here. So you have to have a certain number of people to be able to do anything. You know.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Want to get one of your books?
Okay.
Encourage everybody else if you'd like.
Real quick, we got a couple minutes left. I'm really going to put him on the spot. This fellow here in the pink shirt, I met at the Monroe Institute. Do you know what that is? Any of you? Okay. Well, he and I, it turns out, he lives in Corinth and I live up here in Valley Ranch. We live close to each other, but we had to go off to Virginia to meet about 12 years ago. We ran into each other there, taking the Gateway Voyage to learn how to do remote viewing. And we spent a week, a rather intense week, and one of the things they do in that, they take away your watch and everything, and you know, you go into isolation and hopefully learn to remote view. The scientist in me never could turn it off. And that was long before, a little bit before I met Peter, a couple of years. So that was my first experience at trying to have an altered state or an out-of-body experience or whatever where I failed. And you know, this wasn't something that I had just fell into when I went to the jungle with Peter. But I noticed David and I talk every once in a while on the phone, and he's nice enough to invite us over to swim in his pool. But he bought the book, and I'm going to put him on the spot because I think I know him well enough. We may find out, and I may embarrass Peter, me, and David all at the same time here. But Dave, you want to give us a quick book report?
Well, number one, I highly recommend the book. Excellent book. What I told Lynn on the phone the other day was that it's like an in-your-face, this is how it is type book, and I really appreciated that approach. Everything about it. I mean, really learn what the experience of ayahuasca means in this book. And Peter has only had a very brief amount of time to try to give the essence of that experience to us today. The book will really help you a lot more to understand what ayahuasca means, what it can do, what it's about. So I would highly recommend it.
Thanks.
I'm glad he didn't say it sucked.
Well, he could have. I know him well, but I didn't think he would. Now, before you guys think Peter is an angel and perfect, I've got to tell my worst Peter Gorman story. He tried to kill me.
No.
When you go on the jungle, you're in the, you know what I'm getting ready to talk about, I think. We travel in dugout canoes. Literally, this is third world. And I was there with my adopted son, Richard, who all of you know and have seen at these meetings. And we had gone up, and Peter had this wonderful, wild idea. We were going to go hike back in the jungle somewhere one day and look at big, giant lilies. What the hell? You know, okay, we're all going to go doop-to-doop-to-doop. Fearless leader. So we jump in these little dugout canoes and we paddle on up. Well, this is during the time of year when the Amazon is dropping. So what happens is the water level may drop 15 or 20 feet a day. And where the shore was underwater, now it's suddenly mud, but it's not mud, this is like quicksand. I call it quick mud because you just disappear into it. So we parked the boats finally, and the guys get out with their machetes and they're chopping down trees and trying to make a little walkway for people to get out. And I'm kind of a big guy. So I stood up in the middle of my dugout canoe. Peter was in the one next to it. And I'm trying to walk down the middle of it carefully. And Peter decides to help me. He reaches out, grabs the canoe, pulls it over next to his, and I step right off the side of that canoe into this quick mud. And I disappear. Boom! Fortunately, I had caught onto the side of the canoe, and I've got a hold of it, and this stuff's sucking me down, you know, and it creates a vacuum. And I really thought, you know, this is it. I'm going to disappear. I'm going to be like that old cartoon that was in Playboy, the guy like this, and it says, oh, that's Carruthers. He was an angry young man to the end, you know. But I had a plan B. I was trying to pull myself out, and I thought, well, if they pull the boats back, they may be able to drag me through this muck and slime until we got back into the channel, and I'll be able to get out then. But fortunately, I was able to pull myself up out of that thing. Peter goes, folks, don't touch the boat when somebody's trying to walk in it. I went, this was a lesson for the tourists. So, if that wasn't enough, that time I fell in feet first. When we got through hiking, and we never did make it to the lily pads because they were inaccessible.
Dangerous, yeah.
It got dangerous beyond.
Falling in the mud and the sucking mud isn't dangerous.
It's even worse.
It's worse.
When we got back, I went back ahead of everybody, and I stepped in the canoe. It's full of mud from my first expedition into the mud. My head went over the side, my feet went up in the air, and so now I got my head down in this stuff. And my knees, fortunately, and one arm were still in the boat. So I got myself out again, and I'm sitting there totally and completely covered in mud by the time everybody else walks out of the jungle. So as we went back, we had an ongoing mud fight with my socks between the two boats. And the good part of this story is that my son Richard decided that he actually loved me. And for the rest of the week, he would always come over and go, Dad, are you okay? Dad, are you fine? Dad, I thought you were going to die. He says, now I'm going to go down to the river and we're going to go fishing for piranhas. Can I leave you? Rich, I'm fine, go. Are you sure? Because I thought you were going to die. I'm fine. So we bonded. That's the male bonding you hear about.
Sure would like to have a picture of you all covered in mud.
There you go.
You almost would have had the last picture of me. Anyway, Peter, thank you so much.
At least there weren't piranhas in the river.
There are piranhas in the river.
But you didn't meet any.
Well, I have met some. Now, I will tell you a story. Piranhas like soap because soap's made from fat. Okay, so when you're taking a bath and you're rubbing fat all over your body, you've all been out with a little fish kind of nibble. Your little piranhas do the same thing, right?
Little nibbles.
Little nibbles.
But they don't school. It's not a schooling fish.
Oh, they don't?
No, they become very dangerous when, after the flood season, the floodplain, the water's receding from the floodplain, and you're left with oxbow lakes. Now, whatever's in those lakes can't get out. So whatever's in there, if it's one anaconda, two anacondas, if it's 300 piranhas and 500 other types of fish, or 100 piranhas, they're all going to have to eat each other eventually to survive as long as they can, hopefully until the next rain comes or next rain season comes. So there's places where even the Matsez Indians would fish, but not, if they lose their fish hooks, they're not even reaching in 6 feet.
Would it be easier for you guys to just admit you've been smoking that stuff?
Smoking piranha?
No.
Yeah, we had smoked piranha. No, actually, we weren't. But I'll tell you, though, the piranhas is not the one that worries me the most. There's that little bitty bastard that's got the needle nose on it, and if you happen to urinate, it heads for the warm spot.
Oh.
And on the point of its nose, it's got these barbs that point backward, so you can't pull it out. The only way to extract it is to cut open, and it likes urethras, male or female. So one of the things you'll do when you go to the jungle with Peter is he will tell you in the river to take your bath. Don't worry about the piranhas nipping at you. They won't. But don't ever take your underwear off while you're in there. And it's better not to pee in the pool because it will pull it. So it is truly
The river's fast.
it's truly fun.
It's called black water because you can see right through 30 feet deep to the
Oh,
bottom.
okay. So you know when the piranhas or
It's
anacondas are
gorgeous
coming.
and clean. Well, most of them, just like almost all the predator animals, they're night animals. Yeah. So because the day animals, like the little rodents that all get eaten, have learned, hey, if we're out in the day, we get killed, so we'll wait till the night. Which hasn't done them any good because,
So what's Peter Gorman do? He says, everybody in the canoe, it's dark.
He's telling
giving away
stories on
pieces
you.
of secrets. To run a trip where you're going to introduce people to shamanism, where you're going to introduce people to a culture, where you're going to introduce people to
A way of life.
some of the deeper roots they have in their own bodies, stories that Grandma told them from the old country. Now, maybe
So how
Grandma
do you know?
wasn't from the Amazon, she was from Europe somewhere, but
So
if Grandma, those stories are still going to resonate, so yes, I've learned over time that I have to, if I let it resonate from this area, it'll resonate with you from, the night canoeing is something you do, because tomorrow night you're going to drink ayahuasca. And I want the sound of the jungle, the smell of the jungle, I want the noises in your body.
That's part
I
of
want
the
you so
experience.
familiar and I need you confident of my team. So for the night canoeing, when we get to the border, we get to the river, and everybody's got their boots on, and I've told you the cameras, I say, see you later. I'm not going. You're now in a boat. One boat has one of my guys with a shotgun, one's got a couple of spears, one's got a machete. And I know there's a moment when those people wonder, they're just going to kill us now. Gorman's not even coming. The answer is, I hope you think that. Because when they don't, and the boats don't even tip over, and in 2 hours, when each boat comes back having accomplished what I asked it to accomplish, you now have so much confidence in these men that tomorrow night when it's time to drink ayahuasca, and they and I are going to help protect him, along with the women on the team, then you'll be able to let yourself go free. So I have to put you in a position several times over where you're frightened, but we didn't let you get hurt. We tell you what's going to happen, then we let it happen. And then we don't let anything happen. Lynn, if it was his first trip, would probably never have been allowed to get, to be alone anywhere near that boat, to get out of the boat last. Would have had one of my guys there. My guys had probably already taken everybody else off the boats. But this guy's now an old timer, so, he's allowed a little more leeway to kill himself. But it is a book.
You just experience a little more every time you go.
It's really aimed at the idea that you're going to do a medicine that has the capability of shifting you. 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees. And once you open that door, it's never going to close again. So you better like knowing what ghosts look like before you drink this, because after you drink it, you're liable to know what they look like, and you're going to see them in your room and realize they're here all the time. So you got to know, and the only way I know that you know is to go through what I put you through. And I'm old and fat. If I could do it, so could everybody else. So what's the big deal?
But you started when you were young and skinny.
Yeah, I ate a lot of piranhas.
That's good. They said that's very good.
Good eating.